The Galactic Concordance had ruled the stars for over 300 cycles. Their fleet stretched across 1,000 systems, their laws written in light and enforced by dreadnoughts. To them, most worlds were either useful or irrelevant. Earth, listed in their archives as Sol 3, was neither. It was marked with a single ominous label, Class 15 Deathworld. The highest danger rating in their entire xenological database. No one knew exactly what that meant anymore. The original reports had been lost in the Great Archive Purge, and only fragments remained. Whispers of failed scout missions, ships vanishing without a trace, and one chilling phrase repeated in every surviving log, "Do not approach." But time dulls fear, and arrogance grows in its place. High Commander Vexer stood on the observation deck of the flagship Aurora's Judgment, his scaled fingers resting on the cool, transparent steel. Below him, Earth hung in the void like a blue-green jewel wrapped in white clouds. It looked peaceful, fragile even. From this distance there were no signs of war, no orbital defenses, no energy signatures beyond what a pre-FTL civilization might produce. Just oceans, continents, and the faint glow of cities at night. "They call it a death world," said Fleet Strategist Kayla, stepping up beside him. Her voice was calm, almost amused. "Look at it. It's barely holding itself together. Their nations fight over scraps of land and drops of water. They haven't even unified under one government." Vexer nodded slowly. "The archives say their atmosphere is toxic to most non-native life. Their microbes devour foreign cells. Their weather can kill in minutes." "All true," Kayla replied. "But none of that matters if they can't reach us. They have no jump drives, no plasma cannons, no fleet. We've scanned their networks. They're still arguing about climate and borders while we stand at their doorstep." She tapped a command into her wrist console. A hologram flickered to life, a rotating image of Earth overlaid with data streams. "Operation Terravale is ready. 6 orbital insertion platforms, 12 ground assault battalions, full atmospheric suppression field. We'll be in control within 12 hours. Vexer hesitated. The label Class 15 still gnawed at him. He remembered the stories his mentor used to tell, of a scout ship that returned with its crew driven mad, babbling about the planet that fights back. But those were old tales, superstitions. The Concordance had conquered worlds with acid seas and gravity so strong it crushed bone. What could a single rocky planet with primitive mammals possibly do? "Proceed," he said at last. On the lower decks, Ben Carter watched the same planet through a smaller viewport. He wasn't a soldier. He was an analyst, just 28, recruited from a fringe colony for his skill with pattern recognition. He'd been assigned to review all pre-invasion data on Sol 3, and something didn't add up. The official reports called Earth unstable, yes, but the raw sensor logs told a different story. Atmospheric oxygen levels fluctuated in ways that shouldn't be possible. Ocean currents shifted with unnatural precision. And then there were the energy spikes, brief, powerful bursts from the surface that matched no known natural phenomenon. He'd flagged it twice. Both times his report was marked low priority and filed away. Now, as the fleet powered up for descent, he stood alone in the dim light of the data bay, staring at a live feed from one of the scout drones. It showed a city, Chicago according to the geotags. People walked the streets. Cars moved in lines. Birds flew overhead. Normal. Quiet. But in the background something caught his eye. A rooftop antenna array barely visible, pulsed with a faint blue light. Not radio. Not microwave. Something else. Something that resonated at a frequency his scanner couldn't fully decode. He tried to raise the alert again. This time he bypassed protocol and sent a direct message to Vexer's aide. "Sir," he wrote, "I believe we're misreading Earth's threat level. The Death World classification may not refer to the environment, but to the species living on it." The reply came instantly. "Stand down, Carter. Your clearance does not permit strategic input. Return to your station." Ben sighed and closed the console. He watched as the first wave of drop pods launched from the Aurora's Judgment, streaking toward the atmosphere like falling stars. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lisa Tran stood on a research vessel off the coast of Da Nang. The sea was calm, but her instruments weren't. For the past 3 days, deep-sea sensors had recorded strange vibrations, low-frequency pulses that didn't match any known marine activity. Not earthquakes, not whales, not ships. It was as if the ocean floor itself was humming. She adjusted her headset, listening to the audio feed. Beneath the usual crackle of water and distant ship engines, there was a rhythm. Steady, purposeful. "Hey, Min," she called to her assistant. "Run a spectral analysis on Channel 7. "I think we've got something." Min frowned at his screen. "It's not geological. And it's not human-made. At least not anything in our databases." Lisa bit her lip. She'd spent 10 years studying marine ecosystems, and she knew when nature was acting strangely. This wasn't random, it felt coordinated. Unbeknownst to her, thousands of similar anomalies were being recorded across the globe. In Siberia, seismic monitors picked up synchronized tremors. In the Amazon, drone cameras captured swarms of insects moving in perfect geometric patterns. In Nevada, a decommissioned military base, long thought abandoned, suddenly powered up, its old radar dishes turning toward the sky. Humanity had spent centuries preparing for threats. Nuclear war, pandemics, asteroids. They'd built bunkers, stockpiled food, encrypted data in lunar vaults. They'd even coded emergency protocols into civilian infrastructure, hidden in traffic lights, power grids, even children's toys. No one government had done it. It was a quiet global understanding. If the sky ever fell, they'd meet it standing. But no one expected the sky to fall from another star. Back aboard the Aurora's Judgment, the first signs of trouble arrived not with explosions but with silence. The lead drop pod, carrying 200 elite shock troops, vanished the moment it hit the upper atmosphere. No distress call, no debris, just gone. Then the second pod went dark. Then the third. Kayla's calm demeanor cracked. "Reroute comms. Activate backup relays." But the relays were already jammed. Not by crude radio noise, but by something smarter. Adaptive interference that mimicked their own encryption keys. It was like the planet was learning their language as they spoke it. Vexer stared at the tactical display, his claws digging into the armrests. "Impossible. They don't have this technology." Ben Carter, watching from the data bay, whispered to himself, "They don't need it. They've had centuries to get ready." High above, the Concordance fleet hovered, powerful and proud. Below, Earth waited, quiet, ancient, and very, very awake. The invasion had begun, and the Deathworld was just getting started. The Concordance fleet had expected resistance. They had planned for missile silos, fighter jets, maybe even crude orbital platforms. What they got was silence and then chaos. The first drop pods vanished without a trace. No explosions. No wreckage. Just empty telemetry where soldiers should have been. High Commander Vexer ordered a second wave, this time with hardened comms and shielded hulls. These made it through the atmosphere, only to be met by swarms of small, fast drones that moved like schools of fish. They didn't fire lasers or missiles. They latched onto the pods, injected corrosive nanites, and melted through armor like acid through paper. Inside, the Concordance troops suffocated as their suits failed. Their oxygen lines clogged with something that looked like black mold but ate metal. On the ground in Nevada, Captain Dan Miller crouched behind a rusted-out truck, watching through thermal goggles as the third pod crashed into the desert. It hissed as it cooled, steam rising in the dry air. He tapped his earpiece. "Team Echo, hold fire. Let them step out." From hidden trenches, soldiers waited. They weren't in uniform. Some wore jeans and hoodies. Others had old military jackets patched with duct tape. But every one of them held a weapon that looked like it belonged in a museum, except for the glowing coils wrapped around the barrels and the humming power cells strapped to their belts. The pod hatch opened. A Concordance soldier stepped out, scanning the horizon with a multi-spectrum visor. He saw nothing but sand, scrub brush, and ruins of an old town. He signaled to his squad. That was when the ground exploded. Not with bombs, but with traps. Pressure plates triggered buried sonic emitters that vibrated at frequencies that shattered alien bone. Nets made of spider silk-thin wires laced with neurotoxins dropped from drones hovering just below cloud cover. And then came the bugs, not ordinary insects. These were bred in underground labs beneath New Mexico, fed on engineered fungi and tuned to detect non-terrestrial biochemistry. They swarmed the invaders, crawling into joints, eyes, breathing slits. Within minutes, the squad was down, twitching, their armor useless against a threat they never trained for. Dan didn't cheer. He just nodded and said, "Move to Grid 7. They'll send more." Back in orbit, panic spread through the Aurora's Judgment. Kayla paced the command deck, her voice sharp. "We're losing contact with all ground units. Scans show no heavy weapons, no energy signatures beyond civilian levels. How are they doing this? Ben Carter stood near the back, unnoticed. He'd been watching the data streams. Earth's internet, what the concordance had dismissed as chaotic noise, was now acting like a single nervous system. Traffic cameras, weather satellites, even smart refrigerators were feeding data to hidden AI nodes buried in old Cold War bunkers. These AIs weren't sentient, but they were fast. They predicted drop zones, rerouted civilian traffic to mass troop movements, and even hijacked concordance drones by mimicking their handshake protocols. "They're not fighting like an army," Ben murmured. "They're fighting like an ecosystem." No one heard him. Meanwhile, in Colorado, a group of teenagers in a high school basement rerouted a decommissioned satellite to blind a concordance recon drone. In Brazil, farmers used modified tractors to lay down fields of genetically altered wheat that released spores toxic to alien lungs. In Jakarta, a street vendor's food cart doubled as a signal jammer, broadcasting white noise that scrambled concordance comms across Southeast Asia. Lisa Tran, still on her research boat, got a call from an old friend at the Pacific Defense Initiative. "We need you," the voice said. "The ocean's reacting. It's like it knows they're here." She didn't ask how. She just packed her gear and boarded a hydrofoil heading for a hidden submersible dock near the Mariana Trench. There, she met engineers who showed her something impossible. A network of deep-sea sensors built decades ago during a secret UN project, now awake and active. The system, codenamed Leviathan, was designed to monitor tectonic shifts. But someone had repurposed it. Now it could trigger underwater landslides, redirect currents, even summon bioluminescent algae blooms that blinded sonar. They didn't build a weapon, Lisa realized. They turned the whole ocean into a defense grid. Back in Nevada, Dan's team regrouped in an old mine shaft. A civilian hacker named Rico handed him a tablet. "I cracked their comms," he said, grinning. "They think we're using radio. But we're not. We're using the power grid. Every transformer, every streetlight. It's all part of the network now." Dan looked at the screen. It showed a live feed from inside a concordance command pod. The aliens were arguing. One voice, calm human, spoke in their language. It was Ben Carter. He'd found a way to patch into their internal channels using a stolen encryption key and a hacked satellite uplink. "Earth isn't just a planet," Ben's voice said in flawless concordance dialect. "It's a trap that's been setting itself for 10,000 years. You didn't invade a world. You walked into a species that evolved to survive extinction." The aliens froze. Then alarms blared. Their own systems began shutting down, not from outside attacks, but from within. Their AI assistants glitched. Their medpacks released wrong chemicals. Even their food synthesizers produced poison. On the Aurora's judgment, Vexer finally understood. The Deathworld label wasn't about volcanoes or predators. It was about the humans. They weren't primitive. They were patient. They'd spent centuries turning every weakness into a weapon, every disaster into a drill. They'd fought ice ages, plagues, nuclear winters, and won. Now they were fighting something new, and they were good at it. Kayla ordered a retreat, but it was too late. Earth's response wasn't just military. It was total. Birds with microtransmitters guided drone strikes. Trees in reforested zones released pollen that clogged alien filters. Even the weather seemed to turn against them. Storms forming out of nowhere. Winds shifting to push drop pods off course. In Moscow, a retired physicist activated a solar mirror array left over from a failed climate project. It focused sunlight onto a concordance landing zone in Siberia, turning snow to steam and metal to slag. In Kenya, a group of engineers and elders powered up ancient resonance towers built during the resource wars. The sound they emitted didn't hurt humans, but it scrambled the neural implants the concordance troops relied on. By nightfall, 3 full battalions were gone. Not defeated, erased, as if Earth had swallowed them whole. Dan sat by a campfire, eating a cold ration bar. Rico joined him, holding a cracked phone. "They're calling us monsters up there," he said, showing a hacked message from the Aurora's judgment. Dan shrugged. "We're not monsters. We're survivors." Above them the stars glittered, but one star, the one where the concordance fleet hung, was flickering. Not from damage, from fear. The invaders had come expecting a weak, divided world. Instead, they found a planet that had spent its entire history preparing for the worst. And the worst, it turned out, was them. Ben Carter watched from his console as Earth's countermeasures spread like wildfire across the globe. He knew the Concordance would try something desperate next. They always did. But for now, humanity had held the line, not with nukes, not with armies, but with cleverness, courage, and the quiet, relentless will to live. The Deathworld had spoken, and the galaxy was about to learn its language. The Concordance fleet had lost more than ships and soldiers. It had lost its certainty. High Commander Vexer sat alone in his quarters, staring at the live feed from Earth. Cities still glowed. Forests still breathed. Rivers still flowed. But everywhere his forces landed, they vanished. Not in fire, but in silence. No grand battles. No heroic last stands. Just disappearance. As if the planet itself was digesting them. Fleet strategist Kayla entered without knocking. Her usual calm was gone. Her eyes were sharp with fear. "We've confirmed it," she said. "The humans aren't just defending. They're coordinating across continents. No central command. No visible leadership, yet every action fits together like pieces of a machine." Vexer didn't answer. He replayed the footage from Siberia, the moment the solar mirrors activated. Not a military installation, just old towers half buried in snow, suddenly alive with purpose. And in Kenya, those strange towers humming with sound that made Concordant soldiers collapse, clutching their heads. The humans hadn't built weapons. They'd repurposed everything they already had. "They've been ready," Vexer whispered. "For how long?" Kayla shook her head. "Centuries, maybe. Their history is full of near extinctions, ice ages, plagues, wars that nearly wiped them out. Each time they adapted. Each time they survived. And each time they built something to make sure it wouldn't happen again." On Earth, the response deepened. In Brazil, scientists released clouds of engineered microbes into the Amazon. These tiny organisms didn't harm humans or animals. But when they touched Concordance armor, they broke it down into harmless dust. Within hours, entire squads found their suits crumbling like old paper. In Russia, old nuclear missile silos, long decommissioned, opened not to launch warheads, but to deploy sensor drones that mapped alien energy signatures. These drones fed data to civilian networks, which then redirected traffic, power, and even weather forecasts to hide human movements and expose alien ones. Lisa Tran stood inside a pressurized chamber deep beneath the Pacific. Around her, walls of living coral pulsed with soft blue light. This was Leviathan's core, a fusion of biology and machine grown over decades in secret. The coral wasn't natural. It was bioengineered to process data, using chemical signals instead of electricity. It had been dormant for years, waiting. Now it was awake. "We've mapped their geothermal taps," Lisa said to the team around her. "They're anchoring something big beneath the Himalayas. If it activates, it could crack the planet's crust." A young engineer named Omar nodded. "We can disrupt it." "But we need the ocean's help," Lisa smiled. "Then let's ask." She input a sequence into the console. The coral glowed brighter. Across the Pacific, trillions of plankton, genetically tuned to respond to specific frequencies, began to shift. They swam toward hydrothermal vents, forming living barriers that blocked heat flow. The vents cooled. The tectonic sensors on the Concordant side registered anomalies. Their geothermal anchors started to fail. Above ground, Dan Miller led a team through the ruins of Kathmandu. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were guides, medics, and messengers. Refugees followed them, carrying children, food, and tools. But hidden in their packs were more than supplies. There were seeds, engineered to grow fast, absorb radiation, and release compounds that confused alien sensors. They planted them as they moved, turning scorched earth into cover. In Montana, a retired teacher named Helen used her ham radio to coordinate with farmers across 3 states. They drove tractors in patterns that created electromagnetic fields, masking the heat signatures of hidden bases. In Nigeria, street artists painted murals that doubled as QR codes. When scanned by old smartphones, they unlocked emergency protocols stored in cloud backups. No one was in charge, and yet everyone knew what to do. Back on the Aurora's judgment, Ben Carter watched it all unfold on his screen. He'd been moved to a secure monitoring station after his warning went ignored. Now he was the only one who understood the pattern. Earth wasn't fighting with armies. It was fighting with culture, biology, memory, and time. He typed a new message, this time not to Vexer, but to the lower ranks of the Concordance fleet. Soldiers from conquered worlds pressed into service, tired of dying for a cause they didn't believe in. Your leaders lied to you, he wrote. Earth isn't weak. It's awake. And it doesn't hate you. It just wants you to leave. He sent it through 1,000 hacked channels through satellite relays, drone networks, even the power grid of a concordant supply ship. Within minutes, whispers spread among the conscripts. Doubt took root. Kayla noticed the shift. Reports came in of delayed orders, missed signals, even small acts of sabotage. A fuel line cut, a comms array misaligned. Nothing major, but enough to slow them down. They're turning our own people against us, she told Vexor. Vexor stood. His voice was low. Then we end this now, he gave the order. The Annihilation Spire would activate ahead of schedule. It was a last resort weapon, a device designed to fracture a planet's core, turning it into a molten husk within hours. It had never been used, not because it was cruel, but because it was wasteful. Planets were resources, but Earth was no longer a resource. It was a threat. Deep beneath the Himalayas, the spire hummed to life. Its energy core pulsed, drawing heat from the mantle. Cracks spread through the rock. Mountains trembled, but Earth was already responding. In Kenya, the resonance towers changed pitch. Now they didn't just disrupt neural implants. They vibrated at frequencies that matched the spire's harmonic signature. The vibrations traveled through the crust, interfering with its calibration. In the Atlantic, old submarine cables, thought dead, carried pulses of energy from geothermal plants in Iceland. These pulses fed into underwater drones that swam toward the Indian Ocean, releasing clouds of conductive gel that shorted out the spire's external sensors. Lisa Tran watched the data stream. It's working, she said. But not enough. We need to hit it from inside. Dan Miller got the call an hour later. His team was chosen, not because they were the best fighters, but because they knew how to move quietly, think fast, and trust strangers. They would infiltrate the spire's main chamber through old mining tunnels, now repurposed as emergency routes. As they prepared, a woman named Priya, a botanist from Delhi, handed Dan a small pouch. Plant these near the core, she said. They'll grow fast, and they'll eat whatever metal the spire is made of. Dan nodded. He didn't ask how she made plants that ate alien alloys. He just trusted her. High above, the Aurora's judgment powered its main weapon. Vexor would not wait. If the spire failed, he would glass the surface himself. But down below, in forests, cities, oceans, and mountains, humanity moved as one. Not because they were ordered to, but because they remembered what it meant to be human, to protect, to adapt, to endure. The Deathworld wasn't just surviving. It was fighting back with everything it had ever learned, and it was winning. The Annihilation Spire pulsed deep beneath the Himalayas, its core glowing like a captured star. Heat rose through ancient rock, melting tunnels, boiling underground rivers. High Commander Vexor watched from orbit, his claws clenched. This was the end. If Earth would not fall quietly, it would burn. But Earth had other plans. Dan Miller moved through the dark tunnels, his boots silent on wet stone. Behind him, 6 others followed. Engineers, medics, a former miner from Chile, and a quiet teenager named Leo, who knew every inch of these caves from old survey maps. They carried no heavy weapons, just tools, seeds, and hope. Above them, the mountain groaned. The spire's energy was warping the earth, cracking bedrock, shifting gravity in small, deadly ways. But the humans had expected this. For decades, geologists had mapped these faults. Now those maps guided them through safe paths while the spire's own vibrations weakened its foundation. In the Pacific, Lisa Tran stood before the coral core of Leviathan. Her hands flew over the console as data streamed in from thousands of sensors. The spire's drawing power from 3 geothermal vents, she said. If we cool them fast enough, it'll stall. Omar nodded and tapped a command. Across the ocean floor, swarms of drone manta rays, built from recycled submarine parts and powered by tidal currents, rushed toward the vents. They released clouds of engineered plankton that absorbed heat and reflected it back into the water. The vents cooled. The spire shuddered. On the surface, Priya's seeds were already working. Planted near the spire's outer casing, they sprouted in minutes, their roots laced with enzymes that dissolved alien alloys. Metal turned to rust, seals cracked, coolant leaked. Inside the Concordance fleet, chaos grew. Ben Carter's message had spread like wildfire among the conscripted crews. Beings from 100 conquered worlds who'd never wanted this war. On the supply ship, Dawn Mender, a group of insectoid engineers disabled their weapon relays. On the troop carrier, Iron Veil, pilots refused to launch new drop pods. Mutiny wasn't loud. It was quiet. A turned-off console. A delayed order. A door left unlocked. Kayla saw it happening. She tried to restore control, but trust was gone. Even her own guards hesitated when she gave commands. She looked at Vexer. "We're losing them." Vexer didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Earth. Something was wrong. The Spire's power curve was dropping. Not failing, but being pushed back. As if the planet itself was resisting. Deep in the mountain, Dan's team reached the final chamber. The Spire loomed ahead, a tower of black metal and blue fire. Heat washed over them. Leo pointed to a narrow service shaft. "That leads to the core regulator. But it's crawling with their drones." Dan nodded. "Then we go quiet." They moved like shadows. Rico, now patched into a stolen Concordance comms band, whispered updates from a hidden relay in Nepal. 2 drones patrolling Sector 9. They reset every 30 seconds. "You've got a 5-second window," Dan counted in his head. 3, 2, 1. They slipped through. Inside the regulator room, the air buzzed with energy. Wires pulsed like veins. Dan pulled out a small device, a fusion of old smartphone parts and military-grade EMP tech. "This'll fry the control matrix," he said. "But it needs to be placed right on the main node." Leo stepped forward. "I'm smallest. I can reach it." Before anyone could stop him, he crawled through a gap in the casing. Sparks flew. He winced but kept going. Seconds later, he slapped the device onto the node and scrambled back. "Clear," Dan yelled. They ran. Behind them, the device activated, not with a bang, but with a deep hum that turned into a scream of overloaded circuits. The Spire flickered. Its light dimmed, then surged again, angry, unstable. "It's not enough," Lisa said, watching the data from thousands of miles away. "We need to hit it from the inside and the outside at the same time." She made a decision. "Activate protocol bloom." In labs across the globe, scientists opened sealed vaults. They released spores dormant for 20 years into the air. These weren't weapons. They were messengers. Each spore carried a genetic key that triggered a response in Earth's biosphere. Trees released pollen that jammed alien sensors. Birds changed their flight patterns to confuse drone tracking. Even the wind seemed to shift, carrying microbes that clogged the Spire's cooling vents. The planet was fighting as one. Back in the mountain, Dan's team emerged into a side tunnel just as the Spire let out a deafening roar. The ground shook. Rocks fell. But the structure held for now. Above them, the Concordance fleet was falling apart. On the Aurora's judgment, Vexer ordered the orbital cannons charged. "If the Spire fails, we glass them from orbit." But Kayla stood in his way. "We can't," she said. Look, she showed him a live feed from the lower decks. Conscripted soldiers had taken control of 3 cargo bays. They weren't attacking. They were broadcasting. To every ship in the fleet, they played Ben Carter's message, now translated into 50 languages. And behind it, they played something else, recordings of Earth, children laughing, rain on leaves, ocean waves, music from 1,000 cultures. It wasn't propaganda. It was truth, Vexer stared. For the first time, he saw Earth not as a target, but as a home. Then the alarms blared. The Spire was collapsing, not from damage, but from overload. Its core was destabilizing. If it blew, it would take half the continent with it. Lisa knew this. Dan knew this. And they both knew what had to happen. From the Pacific, Leviathan sent one final command. The coral glowed white-hot. Across the ocean floor, every drone, every sensor, every living machine poured its energy into a single pulse. It traveled through tectonic plates, through magma flows, through the bones of the world, straight to the Spire's base. At the same moment, Dan's team triggered the last charge, a shaped explosive made from fertilizer and old rocket fuel. It didn't destroy the Spire, it redirected its energy inward. The Spire imploded, not with fire but with silence. A vacuum of light and sound, then a deep calm. On the Aurora's judgment, the sensors went quiet. The Spire was gone. Earth's surface remained intact. Cities still glowed. Forests still breathed. Vexer sank to his knees. He finally understood. You didn't invade a Class 15 Deathworld. You survived it if you were lucky. Kayla turned to her officers. Order full retreat. All ships now. But it was too late for some. As the Concordance fleet turned to flee, Earth's final defense activated. Not weapons, warnings. Every satellite, every radio tower, every phone on the planet broadcast the same message into space. Leave and never return. The message wasn't angry. It was sad. And final Ben Carter watched from his console as the fleet broke formation. Some ships jumped to warp. Others drifted, their crews in shock. He knew the war wasn't over, but the invasion was. Down below, Dan helped Leo out of the rubble. The boy was bruised but smiling. "We did it," he said. Dan looked up through a crack in the mounting. No stars shone above. One of them was moving away. "Yes," Dan said. "We did." And far below, in the dark and quiet deep, the coral pulsed once more, then settled into sleep, waiting for the next time the world needed it. The Concordance fleet fled Sol system in pieces. Some ships jumped to warp before their engines were fully charged. Others drifted dead in space, their crews too broken to give orders. The great armada that had come to claim Earth left behind only wreckage, silence, and a single repeating signal broadcast from every human-made transmitter in the solar system. "Do not return." High Commander Vexer did not survive the retreat. In the chaos of the Aurora's Judgment's final moments, his own second-in-command sealed him in the command chamber and vented the air. Not out of hatred, but out of shame. The myth of Concordance invincibility had shattered, and someone had to pay. Vexer's body floated in the cold dark as his ship limped toward the edge of known space. Fleet strategist Kayla took command of what remained. She did not speak to her officers. She did not issue grand orders. She simply set a course for the nearest neutral port and sent one message across all channels. Operation Terravale has failed. Earth is not a resource. It is a warning. Class 15 means do not approach. Ever. Back on Earth, the sky cleared. The last Concordance drone fell from orbit, burning up over the Sahara like a dying star. People stepped out of shelters, bunkers, and hidden valleys. They looked up not with fear but with quiet relief. The war had lasted less than a week, but it had changed everything. Ben Carter walked out of the Aurora's Judgment's wreckage in Nevada, his hands raised. He was met not by soldiers but by a farmer named Elena, who handed him water and a blanket. He had risked everything to warn them, and they had listened. Now he was home, not because he was human, but because he had chosen to stand with them. He settled in a small town in Oregon, where the trees were tall and the nights were quiet. He taught data science at a community college and never spoke of the war. But sometimes, when the wind blew just right, he would look up at the stars and whisper, "You were warned." Lisa Tran returned to the sea. The coral core of Leviathan had gone dormant again, its work done. She published a paper titled Symbiotic Defense: How Life Protects Itself, but she left out the classified parts. Instead, she wrote about cooperation, between species, between nations, between humans and the world they lived on. Her work sparked a global movement. Old rivalries faded as countries shared seed banks, ocean data, and clean energy tech. They had faced extinction together. Now they chose to live together. Dan Miller hung up his boots. He moved to a quiet valley in Montana where he taught survival skills to kids. Not how to fight aliens, but how to grow food, purify water, and fix broken things. The real weapon, he told them, is knowing how to help your neighbor. He never wore a uniform again. But every year on the anniversary of the invasion, he would stand on a hill at dawn and watch the sunrise, just to make sure it still came. Leo, the boy who crawled into the spire's heart, became an engineer. He designed buildings that could heal their own cracks, roads that cleaned the air, and farms that fed entire cities with almost no waste. He never forgot the dark tunnel or the hum of the dying machine. It taught him that courage wasn't about strength. It was about showing up when it mattered. Across the planet, life returned to normal, but a new kind of normal. The old divisions, borders, languages, beliefs didn't vanish, but they softened. People remembered how they had worked together when the sky fell. They kept the networks alive, not for war, but for sharing. A farmer in Kenya could talk to a fisherman in Norway about weather patterns. A student in Brazil could learn coding from a teacher in Japan. The same systems that had fought the Concordance now helped humanity thrive. In deep space, the Concordance collapsed. The conquered worlds rose up. Without the myth of superiority, the Alliance had no glue. Civil war tore through their systems. Some fled to the edges of the galaxy. Others sought peace. A few even sent quiet messages to Earth, not to attack but to ask for help. They were ignored. Not out of cruelty but caution, Earth had learned its lesson too. Years passed. Cities rebuilt. Forests regrew. Children were born who would only know the invasion as a story. But the memory stayed, in museums and songs, in the way people looked at the night sky. The phrase, Class 15 Deathworld, spread across the galaxy, carried by traders, refugees, and rogue signals. It no longer meant poison air or killer beasts. It meant something far more dangerous, a species that refused to die. A world that turned every weakness into a shield, every disaster into a lesson, and every stranger into a neighbor when it counted. No fleet ever came near Sol system again. Scanners avoided it. Maps marked it with a skull and the words, "Here lies the grave of arrogance." On Earth, life went on, simple, messy, beautiful. People argued, loved, built, and dreamed. They knew they were not gods. They were survivors, and that was enough. One evening, Ben sat on his porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk. Lisa stood on a beach listening to the waves. Dan taught a group of kids how to start a fire with dry grass, and far below the ocean the coral slept, ready but hoping it would never be needed again. The commanders had asked, "How could you invade a Class 15 death world?" Now the answer was clear to anyone who dared listen. You don't. You learn. You leave. And if you're wise, you thank the stars that it wasn't your world they had to defend.